So, what's on the menu tonight? Liam asked, hoping to criticize something. Hank was ready for him, though. While he hadn't planned on feeding so many people and didn't care to pull out all the stops for them, he felt he had to both impress Caitlin and show up the bartender. Fresh-caught bass, he said, with plantains, celebi puree, pickled celery, and a red bean jus. There's cauliflower hummus, squid ink rice cracklings, lemon gel, and microgreens. He smiled faintly, expecting a lot of oohs and ahs. Got anything vegan? Jeremy/Jem asked. Hank's smile vanished. It's just, I'm vegan. Maybe I forgot to tell you. This is what I made. Yeah, but I'm your guest? Garrett asked why he or she didn't just have all the veggies without the fish. Hello, they were cooked on the same stove. It's contaminated. Maybe you've never heard of veganism? Oh, trust me, I've heard of it. So why don't you know? Maybe you need to think about how that poor fish suffered when it was caught. How it died, sadly, all alone today. Brutally, Hank clapped his hands sharply, like firing a gun into the air to get everyone's attention. I saw some oatmeal in the cupboard. Ew, I hate oatmeal. It's what I got. Kind of failing at being a host, he or she muttered, just loud enough to be heard by everybody. Eager to smooth the wrinkle out of the evening, and quick to not offend a social justice warrior and appear in a blog post, Caitlin came to the rescue. Here! Since I knew you're vegan, I made you this green goddess liquado. It's got everything you could possibly want. It's a shake, a liquado. Didn't I see you blend that up this afternoon and leave it in your sippy cup? Nope, I just made it. Just now. For you. Funny, I didn't hear the blender. I did it by hand. Oh, it's organic. No thanks. I've got some whole grain bran crunchies then. Everyone turned expectantly to Jeremy/Jem, who enjoyed the spotlight for a moment. He or she swayed a little, twisting his or her trunk as if deciding, then asked, Is it gluten-free? So, I have an idea, Jaden said, breaking the silence after their first bites of the bass. The others looked at him in surprise, because he didn't often say much and tended to disappear in a group. I read an article about a circle of friends stuck in this house during a storm, and they found a bunch of old ghost stories on the bookshelf. Since some of them were writers, they decided they should all write ghost stories of their own. This was like 200 years ago. Garrett nodded. Diodati, 1816. Oh, you read the article too? Jaden asked. Garrett blinked a moment, opened his mouth to say no, but then waved it off and stayed quiet. Jaden went on. So, what they wrote was mostly crap, but there were two really famous books that came out of it. Dracula and Frankenstein. Really? Suzelle asked, sitting forward. Jaden nodded sagely. And today, all of us at breakfast said we were writing a book. Or going to, he added, gesturing toward Liam, who bristled at the very subtle attack. So, I think we should take this time together to have a writer's workshop and make some real progress. Caitlin reached over to curl her fingers into Hank's under the table and smile warmly. Most of the others saw something pass unspoken between them, and some of them resented it. I think it's a great idea, she said. What would you write about? Jaden asked Suzelle, and it suddenly seemed to the others that this was all a contrived way to lure her into conversation, with the ultimate aim of sleeping with her. It was just too deliberate. She sat back and composed herself. I really want to write about my friend Max, who died last year. Oh, everyone said in unison, that sympathetic sound that fluctuates between D, B, and C. Yeah, he was an addict. I want to write about how it felt to watch him do that to himself, how he threw our friendship away, how I was still there for him anyway, how it hurt me to see him just not care about what he was doing to himself. The others nodded quietly and had a moment of silence. Hank reflected on the toxic impulse some suburban white chicks have to see an atrocity and think, how can I make this about me? He wondered if anyone else at the table thought about it the same way. How about you? Jaden asked Jeremy/Jem, and everyone else groaned inwardly, knowing what was coming. I'm glad you asked, he or she said, oh so pleased. I'm in the middle of writing the coming of age of a trans person of color who's fighting for equality in a cruel and unjust world. Caitlin clapped rapidly and quietly with her fingertips and stage whispered, "Yay!" The others looked at her in surprise, but she seemed sincere. "And you, Caitlin?" Jaden asked. Now it seemed to everyone that they had been wrong, and Suzelle was a decoy. Jaden's real target was Caitlin all along. "I kind of always wanted to write a fantasy like The Hobbit, where there's a group of heroes on a quest to find this treasure, and they're going along because there's been a famine or whatever, and their land is really poor now, and they need the gold and jewels to save it and their people." "Is there a dragon sitting on top of it?" Melissa asked, a trace of sarcasm in her tone. "Sure, I don't know. There's a lot of adventures along the way, and it has to be a crazy story with all kinds of trouble in it, so that in the end, when they arrive at the vault where the treasure is, it's a humongous letdown when they open it up and see what the treasure is." "Like what? Like it's not there?" Liam asked. "No, it's there, but it's not what they expected. Instead of old wooden boxes overflowing with gold coins and strings of pearls and whatever, it's like seeds." "Seeds?" Jeremy/Jem asked, incredulous. "Yeah, heaps and heaps of seeds, all different kinds. And a few of the heroes get disgusted and walk off, but one of them goes, "Yeah, heaps and heaps of seeds, all different kinds. And a few of the heroes get disgusted and walk off, but one of them goes, 'Wow, these are tomatoes. These are pumpkins. These will grow into beanstalks. This is the real treasure.' Because think about it. What are gold and jewels? That's just shiny rocks we decided are precious. It doesn't do anything. But seeds, that grows into something. It becomes food for hungry people to eat. That's what they really need to save their land." They looked at each other with down-curving smiles and nodded in co-appreciation of the idea. "But," she said, smiling warmly, "what I really want you all to hear about is Hank's book." If everyone had groaned inwardly when it was Jem's turn, it was nothing compared to the struggle to hide their eye-rolling now. It wasn't so much about what Hank might be writing, but more the transparent ickiness of Caitlin's pride in him. It was so patronizing, so utterly fake. "Historical fiction, you mentioned," Garrett said, "right? With pirates and the Inquisition?" Zamora shook his head. "That's what I was going to write, but I think the reason it was so hard for me to get it on paper is it wasn't the story I was meant to write." He looked at Caitlin, and they shared another sweet smile. From the movement of their arms, the others could see they'd reached for one another's hands under the table and were caressing them. She basked in the warmth of his adoring eyes as he told them, "Caitlin, actually, helped me to see that." "Get a room," Suzelle muttered, poking noisily at her food with her fork. Garrett hissed at her without making a sound. "So," Jaden prompted, "what were you meant to write?" "I'm going to write the truth about war. How it's just a racket for Wall Street and big business to advance their interests, and soldiers who think they're going off to save somebody or defend their country or free people from an oppressive regime are really just muscle men for organized crime." The others' eyes bulged, and they looked at one another in surprise, glad to see their skepticism shared. Some shook their heads as if to clear them, and some others laughed nervously. "Ha, you mean like the mob?" Jaden asked. He shared a scoff and a vigorous nod with Liam. They both looked to the others, who nodded at them too, hoping everyone would agree it was absurd. Those who'd hesitated, who may have been on the fence and were at least willing to wait and hear what Hank had to say, were swayed by their certainty and took up the nod themselves. The momentum of disbelief swept through them. "No, not like the mob," Hank said, part of him retreating from their derision and part of him drawing strength from the beautiful woman beside him. Her belief in him earlier and his need to continue being believed in by her gave him courage. "But you said," Jaden started, and broke off laughing. Hank sat up straighter and deepened his voice a little and got encouragement from the squeeze of Caitlin's hand under the table. He began to defend himself, and his words came out in a rush, faster than he'd intended them to. "I said organized crime. All over the world, criminals run for office and get elected, then remove honest public servants and replace them with their henchmen. They also bribe people to come over to their side with either drugs or sex and blackmail them with videos taken in secret like Jeffrey Epstein did. And eventually they have an entire government on their side. And that's what we became. a plutocratic power structure, asset stripping the U.S., and destroying several other nations through a phony war on terror, he made sarcastic finger quotes in the air, based on false flags and wag-the-dog lies about weapons of mass destruction, again, along with various other large-scale financial frauds. Remember that Saddam turned out to have no weapons of mass destruction and had nothing to do with 9/11, and his country's wealth got plundered anyway? After the Taliban destroyed poppy fields, the U.S. went to guard those fields, and the next thing you know, there's an opioid epidemic. Then we had to go whack Gaddafi to seize control of his 22 tons of gold and the river pipeline that would have brought Africa back to life. The looks on the others' faces, the backpackers grinning from restrained laughter and embarrassed pity from Garrett, made Hank more determined to speak while he had the floor. He had to convince them before they'd shut him up, before they forced him to go back into his shell. Yet the majority of voters, including highly educated and otherwise intelligent people, continue following for this partisan charade, seemingly incapable of looking up at the one plutocracy which controls both parties and owns all of the mainstream media. They continue taking their cues from the MSM propaganda machine, being gaslit and ignoring all the red flags, and talking about what they tell us to talk about, trusting the establishment-approved puppets they tell us to choose from. Okay, so, Jeremy/Jen said, if this sounds a little like conspiracy theory stuff, ooh, the fake news is all in cahoots to pull the wool over our eyes. Like, come on. Zamora's lips grew thin, and he spoke through his teeth. Conspiracy theorist? Yeah, anyone who says anything about this is now automatically branded a conspiracy theorist. You know who made up that term? The CIA, when people didn't accept the Warren report, when they covered up that they killed JFK and Mary Pinchot. They created this negative term that puts a sane, reasonable person in the same category as crazy people who wear tinfoil hats to keep the government from reading their thoughts. So they're laughed at and then dismissed. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. That's okay, honey, Caitlin said quietly. She stroked his hair with her fingertips, and he took a deep breath. Liam, Jem, and Suzelle glanced at Melissa, remembering that she had said something similar earlier that day. Food's great, Garrett said, and the others agreed loudly. Yes, delicious. There followed a heavy silence. The breeze picked up outside, rattling palm fronds against the side of the house, and birds could be heard calling to one another. Somewhere, a dog barked. Garrett wondered where Raoul was, then made a tight smile and forced himself not to care. Jaden watched Hank eat and chewed his lip thoughtfully.